A morning edition of On the Pen. We've got some breaking news in the Zepbound world, and I wanted to jump on with you right away this morning to share some super excellent news. Before we get started, would you hit that like, hit that bell, and the subscribe to notifications? That's what the bell does. It just lets you know when I'm making videos or going live. That's going to be really important as we are entering earnings call season, and we stand to learn a lot about retatrutide, Zepbound, all the things here in the coming weeks. So hit that notification, but hit subscribe and make sure that you join the community. The excellent news about Zepbound that we're dealing with right now is in relation to the heart failure outcomes, right? And so what I want to do is I just kind of want to give you the lay of the land for the Summit trial, which measured outcomes for people with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, very similarly to the SELECT trials for semaglutide, right? So I want to kind of lay out the differences between the two studies, what the two were measuring, and then I want to talk about the implications of the data that we learned from Eli Lilly today. Welcome. If you're just joining me, let me know that you're here. I would love to welcome you into the stream today. So the Summit trial for tirzepatide, good morning, Tay, how are you? Is really measuring a much sort of broader set of outcomes for people living with heart failure than did the SELECT trials for Wegovy. The SELECT trials, which showed a 20% reduction in MACE events, which is major reverse cardiovascular events, basically heart attacks and strokes. So a really narrow focus. Morning, Pamela. Good morning, Manjaro Mom. It's great to have you here today. So the SELECT trials for Wegovy were very narrow in that they were trying to measure the reduction of the biggies, right? Heart attack and stroke. The Summit trials for tirzepatide were a bit broader, where they wanted to, I think, really show how tirzepatide can change the life, the outcome, not just the outcomes of the biggies, right? But how it can actually change the life of somebody living with heart failure. And I think that they accomplished just that. And so one of the measurement tools that they used in this study is called the Kansas City Cardiomyopathy Questionnaire. And then they coupled that with a 6-minute walk test distance. So basically, what they're measuring in the questionnaire is just what are your symptoms that you're having, right? Your shortness of breath, right? Things like that. The 6-minute walk test is really, they give you 6 minutes to walk as far as you can. And so obviously at the beginning of the trial and probably at different points throughout the trial, they were giving this questionnaire out and measuring how people were feeling physically, what symptoms they were having, and then the 6-minute walk test to see how far they could get in 6 minutes. And what they saw were major improvements. So one of the interesting things that we saw is that there was a huge reduction in things like shortness of breath. And the walk test also showed that people's physical mobility was greatly improved when using tirzepatide. So again, a wider outcome sort of swath that they're measuring to show that not only is there ultimately a reduction in major events, which we'll get to, but the lives were improved of the people that were on tirzepatide. If you're just joining us, hit that like button. We're going over some of the Summit phase 3 clinical trials for tirzepatide. So the big outcome here in this trial is that there was a 38% reduction in the risk of heart failure events compared to placebo. Now, this is going to be things like things that required hospitalization, right? So one of the very interesting endpoints is that people on tirzepatide with heart failure ended up in the hospital from major events to the tune of 38% less. So really, really positive outcomes in the the Summit trial. And again, a really much broader sort of paintbrush that they painted with in this clinical trial. Now, I want to sort of go over what the implications are for this, because I think that that's really what's important here. I think we knew that if Wegovy, which is, you know, a single agonist, showed what it showed for heart failure and reduction in MACE events, that you could probably extrapolate that out to drugs like tirzepatide, Mounjaro, and Zepbound. But I think what's interesting here in this trial specifically is that what we're seeing is another backdoor way for people with Medicare Part D coverage to ultimately be able to gain access to Zepbound, right? So now if you're on Part D, your only hope at getting on tirzepatide is really through the type 2 diabetes indication. And that used to be the same case for semaglutide, Wegovy, and Ozempic, where you had to be diabetic to get Ozempic on Medicare. And we saw that once the SELECT trial data dropped for Wegovy, we saw that Wegovy was added to the many Medicare Part D formularies. So sort of a backdoor way into getting Wegovy. Now, we're going to see the same thing when these results are ultimately submitted for tirzepatide to the FDA, which Lilly said will be happening very shortly. We will ultimately see Zepbound added to Medicare Part D formularies for heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, based upon the outcomes in this trial. Again, that 38% reduction in hospitalizations, etc. So I want to kind of tell you why I think this is a really big deal. Because the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, something that we have talked about now for a year and a half on this channel, what the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act has become is not what we were advocating for initially. Now that it has made it out of committee, really all we stand to get from the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act is that potentially, if it's passed in its current form, people who were on a obesity medicine for at least 1 year prior to getting on a Part D plan can continue coverage for their obesity medicine treatment, right? But that's it. That's where it stops. If you're already on Medicare and you're not on a GLP-1 treatment, you're going to be left out in the cold. And so that's a super frustrating thing to me, right? And that's why these clinical trials are so important for accessibility to these medications, and why I'm so thankful that Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk both had the foresight to run these clinical trials where they knew that people in the patient populations who are on Medicare would benefit from things like a heart failure study, like a sleep apnea study, like a osteoarthritis study. And these are all studies that we're now getting data. This data is getting submitted to the FDA, and ultimately you will see the expansion of Medicare into the realm of GLP-1s for these indications. Today's question: so if someone is on the meds for over a year, then goes on Medicare, they're covered. That is essentially what has been written into the TROA legislation as of current. Once it got out of committee, that's sort of where that bill ended up. As far as, you know, the compromises that were made. And so if the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act is passed in its current form, yes, Tay, you're correct, that Medicare would cover people who had been on the meds for over a year prior to getting on to a Part D plan. And then they would be able to, basically it's a continuation of coverage, but for people on Medicare already, they will be relying on these specific indications like the ones that we're talking about today. So not what we hoped for out of TROA. And so that's really sort of where we're at with the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act. That just underscores the importance of news that we learned today, which is this top line data from the Summit trial for tirzepatide, Zepbound, where we learned that there was a 38% reduction in hospitalizations, that there was a massive improvement in physical mobility and a massive reduction in the sort of symptoms that people have, including an escalation of other treatments, medical treatments that they're receiving for heart failure. So that's the news here today. I wanted to jump on and share that with you. This just came in here in the last hour or so. And so we have been kind of combing over this detail, try to put it in context. I think for me, the biggest news about this study is what it's going to do for the Medicare patient population. Obviously, you'll see more payers in health insurance. You know, it's going to be harder and harder for them to deny the benefits of these drugs. And that's why I think the trial design for this summit trial was really sort of ingenious, because you had semaglutide before it, which kind of laid the groundwork for, hey, there's a reduction in heart attacks and strokes, right? And you can see that with Wegovy in the select trials. With this one, it's like, not only is there a massive reduction in hospitalizations, things that would require hospitalizations, but there's also such a vast improvement in the lives and the quality of the lives that people who are living with heart failure are seeing. And that's what I think really is going to be a very hard thing for the insurance companies to deny, that they can improve the lives so dramatically for these people living with these, and increase mobility and all of that. So obviously you saw a little bit more weight loss too with tirzepatide in this trial. That's not what they were measuring, but that was also an exciting sort of outcome as well. 15% I think was the average, and they were studying the 5, the 10, and the 15 milligrams. So we didn't have the incremental doses, which I think is interesting. I think, yeah, I kind of have thoughts about the incremental doses anyway. I think that if they got rid of them, I think that they could really help the supply for these medications. But that's for another day. Thank you for being here. Clark Kent said his mobility has improved so much. I just got back from an hour walk outside. That's awesome. Sue the Dude, J May, Gina. I'm just going to give a few shout outs while we're in here. Deb, DJ, how are you this morning? It's good to see you. Thank you for the kind words you've dropped on my videos the last couple of days. It's been very encouraging. RC, good to have you here. Tay, of course, Kimberly, Manjaro Mom, Pamela, thank you for being here with me today. Make sure that you hit that like button before we go. Make sure that if you're not subscribed to On the Pen, we cover all things incretin mimetics. That's Ozempic, Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Zepbound, Compound. Those are the types of things that we cover here. We have a Thursday night show. Our friend Chanel from over on TikTok, your favorite accountability partner, will be our guest. Super excited about that. We'll probably get into this study a little bit more as well. Of course, we've got an article up about this study at onthepen.com, so make sure you go over to onthepen.com, check that out. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our On the Pen book that will be coming out in the next few weeks here. Yesterday we had an article that I was able to write for health.com. You can go over and check that out. I'll try to link all these things in the description of the video, but we're doing great things here at On the Pen. You are the best part of it. So make sure you hit that like, hit that bell, hit that sub before we go, and we will check you tonight on the Pen. That happens 9 p.m. Central.